Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a medieval village where the air smells of damp straw and wood smoke, and the dawn is already screaming at you with rooster crows and clanging church bells. Picture yourself sprawled on a lumpy straw mattress, the kind that crunches when you roll over, in a dim, drafty hut. The year's roughly 1350, and you're a peasant in some muddy corner of England. Or maybe France, doesn't matter, because surviving today is going to be a slog either way. You probably won't make it past noon without cursing your lack of Wi-Fi or a decent toothbrush. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and the time where you are. I love picturing you all chilling in different time zones. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink awake as slivers of gray light sneak through the cracks in your hut's wattle and daub walls. The air's chilly, and your blanket, more like a scratchy wool sack, does little to keep you warm. Outside, the village is already buzzing. A dog barks, a cartwheel creaks, and someone's yelling about a missing pig. You're not lounging in bed. Sleeping in isn't a thing here. The Lord's Reeve, that nosy overseer, expects you in the fields by sunrise. And oversleeping could mean a fine or a public shaming in the village square. Fun fact, medieval peasants worked about 150 days a year, leaving the rest for holy days or bad weather. But those work days were brutal, 12 hours of manual labor. No coffee breaks. You stumble to your feet, your tunic stiff with yesterday's sweat and dirt. Your shoes, if you can call them that, are leather scraps tied with cords, already soggy from last night's puddle-strewn path. You're starving. But breakfast is hours away first. You've got morning chores. You grab a wooden bucket and head to the well, where the water's cloudy and tastes faintly of earth. Don't drink too much. Nobody's figured out germ theory yet. And that well's probably a petri dish of medieval nastiness. Historians still argue whether villages had designated well keepers or if everyone just hoped for the best. Either way, you're hauling water for cooking, washing, and maybe the Lord's Manor if you're unlucky. Your hut's a one-room deal, shared with your whole family, maybe 5 or 6 people. Plus a chicken that wandered in. The floor's packed dirt, and the hearth's smoldering from last night's fire, filling the air with a smoky haze. You toss a few sticks on the embers, coaxing a weak flame. No central heating here, and glass windows are for fancy folk. You've got wooden shutters that let in drafts and the occasional curious sparrow. Oh, and here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants kept pigs indoors for warmth. Like living space heaters that oink. Imagine waking up to a snout in your face, cozy. Right. You step outside, and the village hits you like a sensory overload. The blacksmith's hammer clangs, a neighbor's shouting at her kids, and the stench of manure is everywhere. You pass a gaggle of geese waddling toward the common pasture, and a kid barefoot naturally runs by, chasing a hoop with a stick. It's not all grim. There's a weird charm to this chaos, like a festival nobody planned. But don't get too comfy. You're about to spend your day dodging cow dung and praying you don't tick off the local priest, who's got a side hustle selling indulgences. Spoiler, your modern hygiene standards and need for personal space, they're about to take a beating. Before you head to the fields, you've got to feed the animals your family's cow, if you're lucky enough to own one. Or maybe just a few scrawny chickens, You scatter some grain, which feels like tossing your paycheck into the wind. Because grain's precious and you're always one bad harvest from starvation. The manor lord owns most of the land, and you're working his fields to pay your rent, plus extra for the church's tithe. It's a system designed to keep you tired and broke. But hey, at least you've got a village gossip network to keep things lively. By now, your stomach's growling, and you're dreaming of anything better than the stale bread waiting for you. Let's see if you make it to breakfast without tripping over a runaway pig or angering the reeve. You're still shaking off the morning chill, trudging back from the well with a sloshing bucket, when you realize hygiene in this medieval village is, frankly, a nightmare. Your face feels grimy, your teeth are fuzzy, and you're starting to smell like yesterday's stew. Bathing's not exactly a daily ritual here, more like a special occasion. And you're about to find out why keeping clean in 1350 is a losing battle. The air's thick with the scent of wood smoke and livestock, and you're already daydreaming about a hot shower that doesn't exist. Spoiler, you're not going to feel fresh anytime soon, and your modern obsession with soap is about to take a serious hit. Let's start with the basics: washing your face. You dip a rag into your bucket of murky well water cold enough to make you wince and scrub your cheeks. Soap. If you're lucky, you've got a lumpy bar made from animal fat and wood ash, which smells like regret and barely lathers. Most peasants don't bother. Water alone's supposed to do the trick. A quirky tidbit: some folks believed washing too much weakened your body's natural oils. So skipping baths was practically a health choice. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or just an excuse for laziness. But either way, you're not winning any cleanliness awards today. Bathing's even rarer? Wealthy lords might have wooden tubs and servants to heat water. But you're stuck with a quick splash in a stream, fully clothed to save time. Streams are freezing, and they double as the village laundry and dishwashing spot. So you're basically rinsing in everyone's leftovers. In some places, public bathhouses exist, but they're more like social clubs where you soak in shared, tepid water with half the village. Imagine a hot tub, but it's 90% germs and 10% awkward small talk. Bathhouses were big in earlier centuries. Roman influence and all that, but by the 14th century, they're fading out, thanks to church warnings about immoral behavior. You're stuck with your bucket and a prayer? Your teeth are another problem. Toothbrushes. Not invented yet. You might rub them with a cloth or chew on a twig mint leaves if you're fancy, but most folks just live with the fuzz. Tooth decay is so common that blackened teeth are practically a fashion statement. Want a wild fact? Some medieval healers used crushed snail shells as toothpaste, claiming it polished teeth. You're not desperate enough to try that yet, but give it a week. Your breath's already a liability, especially since breakfast is still a distant dream. And the village air smells like a mix of manure and baking bread, tempting, but not helpful. Clothing's no cleaner. You're wearing the same wool tunic you slept in, worked in, and probably spilled last week's pottage on. Washing clothes means pounding them in the stream with rocks, then air drying them in a field where they'll pick up dust and maybe a bird dropping. Linen undergarments are a luxury you don't have. Most peasants go without, which makes your scratchy tunic even less fun. Lice are a constant roommate, and scratching's just part of life. You spot a neighbor combing her hair with a bone comb, muttering about crawlies, and you realize you're probably hosting a few yourself. Isn't medieval life glamorous? The church doesn't help. Priests preach that vanity, aka caring about your appearance, is a sin, so you're supposed to embrace the grime. But there's a catch: you still need to look decent for Sunday Mass, or you'll be the talk of the village, and not in a good way. You splash more water on your face, hoping it hides the dirt streaks, but the cold makes your hands ache. Oh, and don't forget the smell. Everyone's in the same boat. So, the village is a symphony of body odor, livestock, and that one guy who swears garlic wards off demons. You're starting to think he's onto something, because your own scent's scaring even you. As you shuffle toward the village center, you notice a kid dunking his head in a barrel, splashing like it's a game. You're tempted, but the water's green, and you've got enough problems. Your skin's already itching, and you're wondering how anyone survives this without losing it. The answer: they don't always. Disease spreads fast in these conditions. But that's a problem for later. You're just trying to make it to breakfast without smelling like a barnyard. For now, you clutch your bucket, dodge a stray goose, and hope the day gets less gross. Spoiler, it won't. You're still itching from your half-hearted wash, trudging toward your hut with a bucket of sloshing water, when your stomach growls loud enough to scare a nearby chicken. It's time for breakfast. But don't get your hopes up. Medieval peasant meals are less farm to table and more whatever's not moldy. You duck back into your smoky, one-room hut, where the hearth's flickering and your family is already bickering over who gets the least stale bread. The air smells of burnt barley and damp straw. And you're about to discover why a peasant's morning meal is a test of endurance. Good luck surviving this without dreaming of a drive-thru. You plop down on a wobbly stool, eyeing the spread, if you can call it that. Breakfast is usually pottage, a watery stew of whatever's on hand, barley, oats, maybe some wilted greens if the garden's cooperating. Today's batch looks like gray sludge, bubbling in a chipped clay pot over the fire. You ladle some into a wooden bowl, and it's so thin it's basically soup with ambitions. Fun fact: pottage was the medieval peasant staple, eaten morning, noon, and night, often for weeks on end. Variety. That's for lords. You're stuck with this glop, and it's already cold by the time you take a bite. Here's a quirky tidbit some peasants tossed in ale to make pottage taste better, or at least numb the monotony. Ale is basically liquid bread, brewed weak and drunk by everyone, kids included, because water's a health risk. You grab a clay mug of the stuff, and it's flat, sour, and smells like yeast gone wrong. Still, it's safer than the well water you hauled earlier, so you sip and try not to wince. Your spoon-wooden, splintery scrapes the bowl, and you find a chunk of turnip, which is basically the medieval equivalent of hitting the jackpot. Too bad it's half rotten. You glance at your family, all hunched over their bowls, chewing slowly to make it last. Your neighbor, Old Agnes, swears by adding crushed acorns to stretch the meal. But you're not that desperate yet. Or are you food scarce? Especially after last year's bad harvest, and the Lord's taken his cut of the grain. Historians still argue whether peasants starved regularly or just lived on the edge of it. But your growling stomach's voting for the former. You're burning calories just staying warm in this drafty hut, and this pottage isn't cutting it. Bread's the other option, but it's not exactly a fluffy sourdough loaf. Yours is a dense, dark lump of rye or barley, baked days ago and hard as a rock. You soak it in the pottage to avoid breaking a tooth. Dental care's not a thing. Remember, if you're lucky, you might get a scrap of cheese, Wayne, but that's a rare treat, reserved for holy days or if you bribe the dairymaid. Speaking of cheese, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant hide his cheese? Because even the rats knew it was his only treasure. You chuckle, but your sister glares. Probably because she's stuck with an even smaller portion. You're tempted to sneak seconds, but the pot's nearly empty, and your mother's watching like a hawk. Food theft's a real crime here. Steal a loaf, and you might end up in the stocks, which you'll see later in the village square. For now, you scrape the bowl, wishing for bacon or literally anything with flavor. The church says gluttony's a sin, but you're pretty sure starvation's the bigger problem. Outside, the village is waking up fully, with carts rumbling and dogs yapping, reminding you that fieldwork's next. Your body's already aching, and this measly breakfast isn't fueling you for the day ahead. As you rinse your bowl with a splash of water, hygiene's still a struggle. You notice a neighbor kid eyeing your crust. You toss it to him, feeling briefly noble. But then you realize you're still hungry. The day's barely started, and you're already fantasizing about lunch. Which, spoiler alert, is probably more pottage. You pull on your soggy shoes, grab a worn-out sickle, and head out, hoping the fields aren't as muddy as yesterday. At least the ale's got a slight buzz. Right, let's see if you can make it to noon without collapsing or stealing a turnip from the Lord's garden. You're still hungry from that pathetic pottage breakfast, your stomach grumbling as you trudge out of the hut, sickle in hand, toward the fields. The village is alive now, with smoke curling from chimneys and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. The air's damp, carrying the scent of earth and manure, and your shoes, those flimsy leather scraps, are already sinking into the mud. It's time to work the Lord's fields, where you'll spend the next 8 hours breaking your back under a feudal system that feels like a cosmic prank. You're about to learn why medieval farming was a soul-crushing grind. And trust me, you're not built for this. You reach the open fields, a patchwork of strips divided among the village's peasants. Yours is a narrow plot, barely enough to feed your family after the Lord's cut. The main crop here is wheat or rye, vital for bread and taxes, but the soil's heavy with clay, and last night's rain turned it into a sloggy mess. You swing your sickle, hacking at weeds, but each step sinks you ankle-deep in muck. Fun fact, medieval peasants used a 3-field rotation system, 1 field for crops, 1 for grazing, 1 fallow to keep the soil fertile. It was clever for the time, but it still meant endless labor for you. Your job today is weeding and checking the crops, which are looking pitiful after a wet spring. You're not alone. Other peasants dot the fields, hunched over, muttering about blight or the reeve's latest demands. The reeve, that smug overseer, rides by on a horse, barking orders. Miss a day's work, and he'll fine you a chicken or worse. You're tempted to fake a limp, but the village gossip travels fast, and you don't need more trouble. Here's a quirky tidbit some peasants believed planting during a full moon boosted yields, so they'd sneak out at night with torches. You're not that committed, but you're starting to understand the desperation. The sun's climbing, and your back's already screaming. Tools are basic, your sickle's dull, And the wooden plow you share with neighbors is heavier than a cart. Oxen or horses would help, but most villagers can't afford them, so you're stuck dragging the plow yourself sometimes. Historians still argue whether this era's yields were enough to sustain growing populations or if famine was always lurking. Either way, you're sweating through your tunic, and the flies buzzing around your face aren't helping. You swat one away, only to realize it's landed in a fresh pile of cow dung lovely. You pause to wipe your brow, squinting at the manor house in the distance, where the lord's probably napping after a breakfast of actual meat. You're working his land to pay rent, plus extra days called boon work just because he says so. It's unfair, but complaining could land you in the stocks, as you'll see later. For now, you keep hacking, your hands blistering. Here's a joke. Why did the peasant bring a ladder to the field? He heard the crops were stalking him. You snort, but the guy next to you just grunts he's too tired for humor. The work's repetitive, mind-numbing, and you're counting the hours until the midday break. Your plot's not just for the Lord. You've got a tiny garden back home for onions and herbs, but that's another chore for later. You spot a kid shooing crows away with a sling, and you're jealous he's got the easy job. The church bell rings, signaling noon soon, and your stomach's begging for more of that watery pottage. You're starting to miss your morning ale, sour as it was. The fields stretch endlessly, and you're wondering how anyone survives this life without losing it. Spoiler, many didn't. As you lean on your sickle, catching your breath, you notice the reeve eyeing you again. Better keep moving or he'll dock your already meager harvest. You're filthy, sore, and dreaming of a world with tractors or at least better shoes. The village is humming with activity now, and you hear whispers of market day coming up, where you might trade a turnip for gossip. For now, you're stuck in this muddy purgatory, praying for a breeze and a miracle to make this day less brutal. You're trudging back from the fields, your tunic soaked with sweat and your hands caked with mud, when you catch the hum of voices in the village square. It's not quite midday, but the gossip's already buzzing like flies over a dung heap. You're about to overhear the village's juiciest rumors and stumble into the web of medieval laws that keep everyone in line or else. The air smells of fresh-baked bread from someone luckier than you, and the square's alive with folks bartering, bickering, and dodging the reeve's watchful eye. Buckle up, because the rules here are as quirky as they are strict, and one wrong move could land you in hot water. You pause near a cluster of women by the church, whispering about a neighbor who cursed her cow after it kicked over a milk pail. Gossip's the village's lifeblood, spreading faster than lice. You hear tales of old Tom, who forgot to pay his tithe and got a public scolding from the priest last Sunday. Speaking of tithes, here's a mainstream fact. The church demanded 10% of your harvest or income. No exceptions. To fund priests and cathedrals. Miss it. And you're risking your soul or at least a fine you can't afford. You check your empty pockets, hoping you've got enough grain stored to keep the church off your back. Then there's the manor court, where the Lord's laws reign. You overhear talk of a bizarre rule: no gathering firewood from the Lord's forest without permission, or you'll owe a pig as a fine. Here's a quirky tidbit: some villages had laws banning women from brewing ale on Sundays, claiming it disrupted holy rest. You spot a brewer, Agnes, muttering about it as she hauls a barrel she's not thrilled. Historians still argue whether these laws were about control or just petty revenue grabs. But either way, you're tiptoeing around them. One slip, like grazing your cow on the Lord's grass, and you're facing the stocks or a day in the pillory, pelted with rotten turnips. You wander closer to the square, where a crowd's gathered around a merchant's cart. Someone's shouting about a stolen hen, and fingers are pointing. The manor court handles these disputes, but justice is weirdly theatrical. Instead of evidence, they might use compurgation. You swear your innocence, and 12 neighbors back you up. No neighbors. Tough luck. You're tempted to join the gossip, but you keep quiet. Last thing you need is someone claiming you hexed their crops. Here's a joke. Why did the peasant avoid the village square? Too many tongues wagging. Not enough ale to drown them out. You smirk, but the tension's real. The laws aren't just about crimes, they're woven into daily life. You can't move to another village without the Lord's nod, and good luck marrying without his approval. He might charge you a merchant fee for the privilege. You overhear a young couple griping about it, their wedding delayed until they scrape together a few pennies. Even your workdays dictated you owe the Lord week work on his fields, plus extra during harvest. It's like signing a contract you never read, with penalties you can't escape. You're starting to see why rebellion simmered. Think of the 1381 Peasants' Revolt, sparked by taxes and unfair rules. As you linger, you catch a whiff of trouble. Someone's been accused of poaching fish from the Lord's stream. The crowd's betting on a public shaming, maybe a dunk in the river. You're glad it's not you. But the gossip's got you paranoid. Did you accidentally step on the Lord's land yesterday? You shake it off, dodging a kid chasing a runaway goose. The square's chaos is distracting, but you've got to stay sharp. Market day is coming, and you'll need your wits to avoid scams. For now, you slip away, hoping to dodge both the Reeves glare and the village's rumor mill. Your stomach's growling again. Maybe the market will have something better than pottage. You're weaving through the village square, still buzzing from the gossip about poached fish and cursed cows, when the noise and smells hit you like a wave. It's market day, and the place is a chaotic jumble of shouting merchants, bleating goats, and the sharp tang of overripe vegetables. Your pockets are light, maybe a few clipped coins if you're lucky, and you're hoping to trade a handful of onions for something useful, like a needle or a bit of salt. Navigating this medieval marketplace is like a high-stakes game of haggling and dodging scams, and you're about to learn why your modern shopping instincts are useless here. One wrong move, and you're walking home with nothing but a bad deal. The market's a muddy clearing lined with rickety stalls where traders hawk everything from lumpy turnips to questionable relics like a saint's toenail. You pause at a baker's stall, the scent of fresh rye bread making your mouth water after that sad pottage breakfast. Mainstream fact markets were the economic heart of medieval villages, often held weekly under the Lord's oversight, who taxed every sale. You eye a loaf, but the baker's demanding a penny half your week's earnings. You offer your onions instead, and he squints, muttering about weevil-free grain. Bartering's the norm, but it's a minefield. You're no match for these seasoned hagglers. You move on, dodging a cart piled with cabbages that's creaking under its own weight. A merchant waves a bolt of rough wool cloth, claiming it's fine as a lady's gown. You're not buying it literally or figuratively because scams are rampant. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some traders used hollowed-out weights to cheat scales, shorten you on grain or cheese. You check your coins, tiny silver scraps often clipped at the edges, making them worth less. Historians still argue whether clipping was a peasant's act of defiance or just shady merchants gaming the system. Either way, you clutch your coins tighter, hoping nobody notices they're a bit too light. A crowd gathers around a fishmonger, his barrels reeking of salted herring. Fish is a hot commodity, especially with Lent looming when meat's off the menu. You're tempted, but the price is steep, and you're still haunted by that poaching gossip from earlier. Better not look too interested. You sidestep a puddle, nearly tripping over a kid selling eggs from a basket. Here's a joke: why did the peasant haggle for eggs? Because he didn't want to crack under pressure. You chuckle, but the egg kid glares, probably thinking you're mocking his prices. Money's another headache. Coins are scarce, and most folks barter goods or labor. You hear a smith arguing with a farmer over a horseshoe's worth in eggs 3, apparently, but the farmer's holding firm at 2. Some villages even use tally sticks, notched to track debts, which you're starting to think you'll need. You spot a spice trader, his saffron and pepper priced for lords, not peasants like you. Spices are gold here, imported from far-off lands, and you're stuck dreaming of flavor while munching plain bread later. The market's energy is thrilling but exhausting, and you're already feeling outsmarted. You finally trade your onions for a small lump of cheese, but the merchant's smirk suggests you got the worst deal. As you tuck it away, you notice the reeve patrolling, eyeing everyone for unlawful trades. Selling outside the market's hours or bypassing the Lord's tax could mean a fine or a day in the stocks. You're sweating now, not just from the sun, but from the pressure to place. System, avoid getting scammed. You're trying to keep your cheese and your dignity, but this market's a battlefield. The noise swells, someone's yelling about a runaway pig, and you're glad it's not your problem. You slip away, clutching your cheese, ready for a break. Maybe that Lord's lunch invitation you heard about will be less stressful than this chaos. You're clutching your hard-won cheese, weaving through the market's chaos, when you catch a whiff of something odd, not just the usual manure and fish, but a faint, acrid burn from a bonfire near the church. The village square's still humming, but now you notice folks whispering nervously, casting glances at a woman tossing herbs into the flames. Superstition runs deep in 1350, and you're about to see how medieval minds lean on bizarre beliefs to make sense of a world that feels like it's out to get you. Every decision, from planting crops to crossing a stream, is tangled in omens and rituals, and you're not sure whether to laugh or run. You pause by the bonfire, where the woman mutters about warding off evil airs that bring sickness. She's not alone. Superstition shapes everything here. Mainstream fact: medieval people relied on the church's calendar of saints' days and celestial events to guide farming, travel, and even haircuts, believing divine forces controlled their fates. You overhear a farmer refusing to sow seeds because the moon's in the wrong phase. Remember that full moon planting quirk from the fields. It's not just folklore, it's survival. If the harvest fails, everyone starves. So they cling to any edge, no matter how weird. Here's a quirky tidbit: some villagers carry amulets made of dried toad skin to fend off the evil eye. A curse blamed for everything from sour milk to sick kids. You spot a kid clutching one. his eyes wide as he avoids stepping on cracks in the dirt path. You're tempted to roll your eyes, but then you notice your own hesitation at a black cat darting across your path. Better safe than sorry. Right. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were genuine faith or just coping mechanisms for a brutal world. But either way, you're starting to feel the paranoia creep in. You pass a group praying over a sick cow, sprinkling it with holy water from the priest, who's charging a penny for the service. The church blesses these rituals but draws a hard line at witchcraft, a vague term that could mean anything from herbal cures to muttering too loudly during a storm. You remember that gossip about the cursed cow from the square. Now you're wondering if someone's getting accused of hexing it. You keep your head down, not wanting to be dragged into that mess. Here's a joke. Why did the peasant avoid the witch's hut? He didn't want to be turned into next week's pottage. You smirk. But the tension's real. Every corner of the village drips with superstition. You pass a doorway marked with chalk to keep spirits out, and a neighbor warns you not to whistle indoors. It summons devils. Even your cheese tucked in your tunic feels like a target. Someone might claim you stole it with a charm. The priest's always preaching about sin, but he's got his own charms for sale, like blessed beads that supposedly cure headaches. You're skeptical, but you're also exhausted, and the line between faith and fear is blurry. The bonfire smoke stings your eyes, reminding you of that smoky hut from this morning. Everything here feels like it's trying to choke you. As you head toward the manor for that rumored lunch with the Lord, you can't shake the unease. The village feels alive with invisible threats, curses, omens, and nosy neighbors ready to point fingers. You're starting to understand why people cling to rituals. They're a lifeline in a world where a bad harvest or a fever could end you. You dodge another unlucky crack in the path, just in case, and hurry along. The market's scams were bad enough, but this superstitious maze is making you question every step. Let's hope the Lord's table is less stressful, though. Knowing your luck, it probably won't be. You're hurrying away from the village square, the bonfire's smoky tang still clinging to your tunic. When you spot the manor house looming ahead, its stone walls a stark contrast to your muddy hut. You've been roped into lunch with the Lord maybe because you hauled water for his cook, or just bad luck, and now you're stepping into a world of polished wooden tables and rules you don't know. The air smells of roasted meat, a luxury you can only dream of. But one wrong move at this table could make you the village's next gossip target. You're about to learn why dining with medieval nobility is a minefield of etiquette and ego. You step into the great hall, where rush-strewn floors crunch under your muddy shoes, already a faux pas. The Lord's at the head of a long table, flanked by his family and a few favored knights, all eyeing you like you're a stray dog who wandered in. Servants bustle with platters of food. You've never seen roasted venison, white bread, even a pie stuffed with something that smells like heaven. Mainstream fact, lords ate far better than peasants, with diets heavy in meat and imported spices. While you're stuck with pottage and prayers, you're offered a seat at the table's far end, where the bread's a bit stale, but it's still better than your breakfast slop. You grab a trencher, a shared wooden plate, and a servant slops on some venison stew. You're starving, but eating's not simple here. You can't just dig in. There's a pecking order. The Lord eats first, then his family, then you. If you're lucky, you wait. watching him tear into a leg of mutton. Grease dripping down his beard. Here's a quirky tidbit: some nobles use manners like eating with a knife, not a fork. Those aren't common yet to show off their status. You fumble with your knife, trying to mimic them, but you're pretty sure you're holding it like a pitchfork. The lady of the manor glares at you and you feel your face heat up. Etiquette's a trap. You're supposed to sip your wine real wine, not your sour ale without slurping. But you're so nervous you nearly choke. Don't even think about wiping your hands on your tunic. There's a cloth for that. But nobody told you where it is. Historians still argue whether these strict dining rules were about refinement or just another way to flex power over folks like you. Either way, you're out of your depth, and the knight next to you keeps accidentally elbowing you. Here's a joke: why did the peasant dread the Lord's feast? Because the only thing served was embarrassment. You force a smile, hoping nobody notices your trembling hands. The food's a revelation. Though, the stew's spiced with pepper, a spice worth more than your hut, and you savor every bite, even if you're sharing the trencher with a sweaty squire. You're tempted to sneak some bread for later. Remember that cheese you haggled for at the market, but stealing here means the stocks are worse. The Lord's talking loudly about his new falcon, and you nod along, pretending you care. Conversation's another minefield. Speak out of turn, and you're rude. Stay silent, and you're rude. You mutter something about the weather, and the table goes quiet great. Now you're the weird one. As the meal drags on, you're sweating under the weight of their stares. The hall's warm, with a massive fire roaring, but you're still in your grimy tunic, itching from lice and superstition-induced paranoia. You're counting the minutes until you can escape back to the village, where at least the rules make sense. The Lord's daughter drops her napkin, and you instinctively pick it up. Big mistake. A servant hisses that only they handle such offers, but you're already dreaming of your next chore, hoping it's less stressful than dodging noble egos at this table. You're slipping out of the manor's great hall, your stomach full of venison stew, but your nerves frayed from dodging etiquette traps. The village is quieter now, with the midday sun casting long shadows over the muddy paths. You're headed to a small workshop near the square, where you're supposed to try your hand at a medieval craft, maybe weaving or leatherwork to help pay your family's debts. The air smells of tanned hides and sawdust, and your hands, still blistered from fieldwork, are about to fumble with tools that haven't changed in centuries. Crafting in 1350 is slow, grueling, and full of quirks, and you're about to learn why you'd never make it as a medieval artisan. You duck into a cramped workshop where a weaver named Geetha looms over a wooden frame, her fingers flying through threads of coarse wool. She's tasked with teaching you to weave a simple cloth, maybe for a sack or a cloak. Mainstream fact: medieval crafts like weaving, blacksmithing, and tanning were vital to village economies, often passed down through families or guilds, keeping communities clothed and equipped. Geetha hands you a shuttle, a wooden tool that looks like a toy boat, and you try threading it through the warp. It's like threading a needle while riding a cart over cobblestones. You tangle the threads, and Geetha sighs, muttering about clumsy field hands. The tools are laughably basic. Your loom's a creaky wooden contraption, and the wool's scratchy, flecked with bits of straw. No power tools here, just your hands, a dull knife for trimming, and a lot of patience you don't have. Here's a quirky tidbit some weavers believed singing to the loom kept the threads from knotting. A superstition Geetha swears by as she hums an off-key tune. You try humming too, but it doesn't help you're still making a mess. Historians still argue whether these craft rituals were practical or just ways to stay sane during endless tasks. Either way, you're starting to respect Geetha's skill, even if she's glaring at you like you've insulted her sheep. You're tempted to switch to leatherwork, but the tanner's shop next door smells like a mix of rotting hides and vinegar hard pass. You stick with weaving, but your cloth looks more like a fishing net than a cloak. Geetha mutters about apprentices taking years to master this, and you're not even close. Here's a joke: why did the peasant fail at weaving? Because his only talent was tangling everyone's nerves. You chuckle, but Geetha's not amused, and you're pretty sure she's regretting taking you on. Your fingers ache and the workshop's stuffy, with dust motes dancing in the sunlight streaming through a tiny window. Crafting's not just about skill, it's about survival. Your family needs this cloth to trade for grain or to appease the Lord's Reeve, who's always sniffing around for unpaid dues. You remember the market scams, those clipped coins and hollow weights, and realize your shoddy cloth won't fetch much. Guilds, if your village has them, control quality and prices, and they'd laugh you out of town for this mess. You're tempted to sneak back to the fields, where at least you know the routine. But Geetha's watching, and quitting now means losing face. Plus, you're still itching from that lice-ridden tunic, and the workshop's warmth isn't helping. As you fumble another thread, you overhear a neighbor hammering at the blacksmith's forge, shaping a horseshoe. Every craft here's a slog, from spinning wool to carving wooden spoons, and you're wondering how anyone sticks with it. The day's dragging, and you're already dreaming of the village feast tonight, maybe some music to drown out this failure. For now, you keep weaving, or trying to, while Geetha corrects your every move. You're starting to miss the manor's awkward lunch, where at least you gotta eat. Let's hope the evening brings less judgment and more ale to ease your bruised ego. You're stumbling out of the weaver's workshop, your hands cramped from fumbling with that cursed loom, and your pride bruised by Geetha's sighs. The village is winding down as the afternoon sun dips, but there's no rest for you yet. A nagging cough's been tickling your throat since that smoky hut this morning, and now you're headed to the local healer's hovel, tucked behind the church. The air smells of herbs and something faintly sour as you approach, hoping for a cure, but bracing for something weird. Medieval medicine's a gamble, and you're about to learn why their remedies might make you wish you'd just toughed out the cough. You duck into the healer's dim hut, where bundles of dried plants hang from the rafters, and a pot simmers with something that looks like swamp water. The healer, an old woman named Ida, squints at you, her hands stained green from grinding herbs. Mainstream fact medieval medicine mixed herbal knowledge with religious rituals, relying on monks, midwives, and local healers. Since trained doctors were rare and mostly served the wealthy, Eda mutters a prayer, then hands you a cup of warm, murky liquid nettle tea, she claims, for your cough. It tastes like boiled grass, and you're pretty sure it's doing nothing but making you gag. Ida's not done. She pulls out a jar of what looks like moldy bread and smears it on a cloth, saying it'll draw out the ill humors. Here's a quirky tidbit: some healers used moldy bread for wounds, unknowingly tapping into penicillin-like properties centuries before science caught up. You're skeptical, but let her tie the cloth around your neck, mostly because she's got a stare scarier than the Reeves. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies worked or just gave people hope while they suffered. Either way, you're praying this cough doesn't turn into something worse, because Ida's next suggestion involves leeches. "'Tis not the season for leeches," Ida says, as she rubs a foul-smelling salve on your chest. You're trying not to breathe in the stench, which is like onions mixed with despair. She chants another prayer, invoking Saint Hildegard, and you're wondering if you should have just stuck with the nettle tea. Here's a joke: why did the peasant avoid the healer? Because her cures were worse than the village gossip. You force a weak laugh, but Ada's not amused, and you're starting to feel like a science experiment gone wrong. The hut shelves are lined with jars of mysterious pastes and dried critters. Think frog legs for fever or spider webs for cuts. You're grateful she's not suggesting those yet, but you're also remembering that well water you drank this morning. Germs aren't a thing anyone understands, so illness is blamed on bad air, sin, or maybe that cursed cow you overheard about in the square. The church looms large here, too. Ada's cures come with prayers, and you're supposed to thank God, not her, if you feel better. You're itching to leave, especially since the salve's making your tunic stickier than usual. And that lice problem isn't getting better. As you sip the last of the tea, wincing, you realize healing's as much about faith as herbs. Ada's muttering about balancing your humor's blood, phlegm, and whatever else she thinks is out of whack. You're no expert, but you're pretty sure your real problem is exhaustion from the fields and that pathetic pottage diet. You thank Ida, mostly to escape and slip out, the evening air cool against your sticky skin. The village feast is tonight, and you're hoping for some ale to wash away this herbal nightmare. For now, you're just glad to be alive, though you're not sure Ida's cure deserves the credit. You're stumbling out of Ida's herb-scented hovel, that foul salve still clinging to your chest, when the sound of laughter and a faint fiddle tune pulls you toward the village green. The sun's dipping low, painting the sky orange, and the air carries the tempting aroma of roasted barley and ale. It's time for the evening feast, a rare break from the grind of fields and looms, where the village gathers to eat, drink, and maybe forget how tough 1350 is. But don't get too excited. Medieval festivities come with risks, from drunken brawls to entertainments that could land you in trouble. You're about to dive into the chaos, hoping to blend in without making a fool of yourself. The green's alive with villagers crowded around trestle tables, laden with bread, cheese, and a few suspicious-looking stews. Torches flicker, casting shadows, and someone's passing around a jug of ale stronger than your morning swill. Thank goodness. Mainstream fact medieval feasts, even for peasants. Marked holy days or harvests, often funded by the Lord to keep everyone loyal, though you're still expected to cheer his generosity. You grab a wooden cup, the ale warm and yeasty, and squeeze onto a bench between a loud farmer and a kid picking at a crust. Your stomach's growling, but you're eyeing the stew warily. Looks like pottage's fancier cousin. But not by much. Entertainment's kicking off, and it's eclectic. A juggler's tossing apples, nearly dropping them, while a minstrel strums a lute, singing about a knight who fought a goose. Here's a quirky tidbit some feasts featured mummer plays, where villagers dressed as saints or demons for crude skits, sometimes offending the priest who's sipping ale nearby. You spot a group setting up for one, with masks made of straw and cloth cute until someone trips and starts a fist fight. Historians still argue whether these performances were harmless fun or a sneaky way to mock the Lord without getting caught. You're just hoping nobody drags you into the act. You take a bite of bread better than your stale breakfast loaf, but still chewy as leather. The ale's loosening everyone up, and the farmer next to you's shouting about a wrestling match later. You're not signing up. One wrong move, and you're nursing a black eye or worse, explaining yourself to the reeve. Here's a joke: why did the peasant skip the feast dance? Because his only move was dodging the Lord's taxes. You smirk, but the kid next to you spills ale on your tunic, adding to the sticky mess from Ida's salve. Great! Now you smell like a brewery in a hedge. The mood shifts as a fire eater takes center stage, spitting flames that make the crowd gasp. It's thrilling, but risky. Last year, a performer set a cart ablaze, and the village still talks about it. You're keeping your distance, clutching your cup, when a fight breaks out over who gets the last hunk of cheese. The priest, half drunk, tries to calm things with a slurred sermon, but nobody's listening. You're tempted to sneak off, remembering the manor lunch's etiquette. Nightmare's feasts are fun until they're not. The music's getting louder, and someone's passing out apples for a game where you bob for them in a barrel. You pass. Your luck's bad enough without drowning in a party game. As the torches burn low, you're feeling the ale's buzz, but the green's getting rowdy. The Lord's men are watching, ready to break up trouble or drag someone to the stocks for disorderly conduct. You're still itching from lice. Your cough's no better, and you're wondering how this feast is supposed to relax you. The night's young, but you're already thinking about your lumpy straw bed, though that comes with its own problems. For now, you sip your ale, dodge a stray apple, and hope the festivities don't end in chaos or a dunk in the village stream. You're weaving through the raucous feast on the village green, the taste of ale still lingering as you dodge a drunken dancer and a stray apple from that bobbing game. The torches are burning low, and the air's thick with laughter and the smoky scent of roasted barley. But the mood shifts when you hear raised voices near the church, a crowd's gathering, and it's not for another lute song. Someone's been accused of a crime, and you're about to witness a medieval trial where justice is less about truth and more about spectacle. Buckle up, because the village's peculiar methods of settling disputes are as messy as the mud on your shoes. You squeeze into the crowd, where a farmer named Watt stands accused of stealing a neighbor's pig. The manor court's been called right here on the green, with the Lord Steward presiding, looking bored in his fancy cloak. Mainstream fact: medieval manor courts handled local disputes, from theft to land squabbles, with the Lord or his steward acting as judge, often prioritizing fines over fairness to fill the manor's coffers. Watt's sweating, claiming the pig wandered into his yard, but the accuser, a red-faced woman, is shouting about her lost bacon. You're glad it's not you up there, especially after that gossip about poaching you overheard earlier. The trial's a bizarre show. Instead of evidence, Watt's swearing an oath on a dusty Bible, and he's rounded up a few neighbors to vouch for him, a process called compurgation. If he gets 12 oath helpers, He might walk free, but you notice only 3 showed up, and one's half asleep. Here's a quirky tidbit: some trials used ordeals like dunking in water if you sank. You were innocent, because God supposedly saved the guilty from drowning. Lucky for Watt, ordeals are falling out of favor, but the crowd's still whispering about divine judgment. Historians still argue whether these methods were about faith or just a way to scare folks into behaving. You're betting on the latter. The steward's not impressed with Watt's defense and sentences him to the stocks for a day, plus a fine of 2 chickens. The crowd cheers, loving the drama. But you're uneasy. Justice feels like a coin toss. You remember the market's clipped coins and wonder if Watt's just a scapegoat for someone else's grudge. Here's a joke: why did the peasant fear the manor court? Because the only thing fair was the judge's bad haircut. You stifle a laugh, not wanting to draw attention, especially since your own tunic's still sticky with Ida's salve and ale from the feast. As Watts led to the stocks, you notice the village's mood shifting back to revelry, like the trial was just halftime entertainment. The steward's already eyeing the next case, something about a broken fence, and you're starting to see why gossip spreads so fast here. It's the only way to keep up with who's in trouble. The church looms nearby, its bell tolling to remind everyone of evening prayers, but nobody is rushing to confess. You're tempted to slip away, the feast fun. But this trial's a reminder that one wrong step, like keeping that cheese you haggled for, could land you in the same spot as Watt. You edge toward the crowd's edge, your cough flaring up again, probably from the smoky torches. The stocks are by the square, and you can already hear kids planning to pelt Watt with rotten vegetables. Medieval justice loves a public shaming, and you're not sticking around to watch. Your day's been long fields, looms, healers, feasts, and now this, and you're craving the quiet of your hut, even if it's drafty and lice-ridden. The night's closing in, and you're hoping to avoid any more drama before you collapse onto that lumpy straw bed. Let's see if you can make it without tripping over another village scandal. You're slipping away from the village green, the trial's drama fading behind the dying notes of the minstrel's lute and the crowd's chatter. The sky's deepening to a dusky purple, and the air's turning chilly, carrying the familiar whiff of wood smoke and damp earth. You're bone-tired from the day's grind feels. Market, that disastrous weaving attempt, and all you want is to collapse in your hut. But medieval bedtime's no cozy retreat, and you're about to discover why your straw bed's more nightmare than dream. The village is settling, but the quiet only amplifies the creaks and scuttles waiting for you in your hovel. You push open the door to your one-room hut, the same smoky, drafty space you woke up in this morning. The hearth's down to embers, casting a faint glow over the dirt floor, where a stray chicken's made itself at home again. Your bed's a sack of straw stuffed into a wooden frame, lumpy and prickly, with a threadbare wool blanket that smells like it's seen better decades. Mainstream fact: medieval peasants slept communally, often whole families in one bed or on the floor, sharing warmth and, unfortunately, fleas. You kick off your soggy shoes, wincing as your blistered feet hit the cold dirt, and pray you don't wake up with a pig nuzzling you like that quirky morning tale. You settle onto the straw, which crunches like dry leaves and pokes through your tunic still sticky with Ida's salve and ale from the feast. The room's crowded. Your family's already snoring, sprawled across their own straw piles. There's no privacy, no pillows, just a faint hope you won't roll into someone's elbow. Here's a quirky tidbit: some peasants stuff their mattresses with dried peas or beans for comfort, only to wake up with sprouts if the straw got damp. You check your bed for suspicious greenery, half laughing at the thought. Historians still argue whether communal sleeping built family bonds or just spread lice faster, your itching skins voting for the lice. The hut's alive with noises: a mouse skitters in the corner. The wind rattles the shutters, and your neighbor's dog won't stop barking. You're tempted to pull the blanket over your head, but it's so thin it barely helps. The cold seeps in, and you're regretting not grabbing more firewood, though that could have landed you in the stocks. As you heard at the trial, here's a joke: why did the peasant sleep so close to his family? Because the fleas threw a better party than the feast? You smirk, but the itch on your leg reminds you it's not far from the truth. Sleep's hard to come by. The church bell tolls compline, the final prayer, but you're too exhausted to trudge to church. Besides, the priest's probably still tipsy from the feast. You try to relax, but every creak makes you jump. Superstition's got you half convinced a spirit's lurking, thanks to those bonfire tales. Your cough's back, no thanks to Ida's nettle tea, and you're wondering if that moldy bread cure was a mistake. The straw digs into your back, and you shift only to hear a sibling grumble about your tossing. You're starting to miss the manor's warm hall, even if it came with judgy nobles. As you lie there, the day's chaos replays: the muddy fields, the market scams, the Lord's feast, and Watt's trial. You're just one peasant in a world rigged against you. And this bed's a harsh reminder. The hearth's glow fades, plunging the hut into darkness, and you pull the blanket tighter, trying to ignore the scuttling sounds. Sleep's calling, but so are the worries of tomorrow: more work, more rules, more chances to mess up. For now, you close your eyes, hoping the night passes quietly and your dreams aren't as rough as the straw. You're lying on your lumpy straw bed, the hut's darkness wrapping around you like a damp cloak, with only the faint crackle of the dying hearth for company. The village outside is quiet now, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or a distant dog's bark. But the silence feels heavy, almost menacing. Your family's snores fill the cramped space, but you're wide awake, your cough nagging and your skin itching from lice and that sticky salve. In 1350, nighttime's not just for sleeping, it's when superstitions from the day, like those bonfire whispers, come alive. And you're about to learn why the dark terrifies even the toughest villagers. You pull the thin blanket tighter, but it does little against the chill seeping through the shutters. Every creak of the hut's wooden frame makes your heart skip. Could be the wind. Could be something worse. Mainstream fact: medieval people feared the night, believing it was when spirits, demons, or even witches roamed. A belief fueled by the church and centuries of folklore. You're remembering that woman by the bonfire, muttering about evil airs. And now every shadow looks like it's moving. You're half tempted to check for that chalk mark on the doorframe, the one supposed to keep spirits out. But you're too spooked to move. Here's a quirky tidbit: some villagers slept with a knife under their pillow. Not for thieves, but to ward off night hags. Mythical creatures thought to sit on your chest and steal your breath. You glance at your own pillow, a lumpy sack, and wonder if a knife would help with your cough. Historians still argue whether these fears were pure superstition or a way to explain real dangers like illness or sleep paralysis. Either way, you're clutching your blanket like it's a shield, trying not to imagine a hag lurking in the corner where that mouse was scuttling earlier. The darkness amplifies every sound. A branch taps the shutter, and you're suddenly sure it's not a branch at all. You remember the village gossip about curses and the trial of Wat with the stolen pig. What if someone's out there, hexing your hut? The church's prayers feel far away, and Ida's nettle tea isn't helping your nerves. Here's a joke. Why did the peasant fear the night? Because even the stars were gossiping about him. You try to laugh, but it comes out as a shaky breath, and you're wishing you'd stayed closer to the feast torches. Even if they came with drunken brawls, you're not alone in your fear. Your neighbor's dog keeps barking, probably at nothing, but it's enough to make you wonder if wolves are circling rare, but not impossible. Thieves are another worry. Your family's meager grain stash is hidden under the floor, but a desperate villager might try their luck. You're tempted to get up and check, but that means crossing the dark hut, past the hearth's eerie glow, the superstitions from the day moon phases. Evil eyes, cursed cows are swirling in your head, making sleep feel like a trap. You're starting to understand why people prayed so hard at complying. As you lie there, eyes darting to every shadow, you're haunted by the day's chaos, the muddy fields, the market scams, the Lord's feast, and Ida's weird cures. The night makes it all feel bigger, scarier, like the world's holding its breath. You try focusing on the snores around you, but they're no comfort. Your straw bed's poking you, your tunic's still sticky, and you're wondering how anyone rests in this world. The village is asleep, but you're not yet. You close your eyes, willing the fears away, hoping the morning brings light and a little less dread. You're still lying on that prickly straw bed, the hut's darkness pressing in as the night's eerie sounds creaking shutters. Distant owls start to blur into a restless haze. Your cough settled to a dull tickle, but the weight of the day's chaos, from muddy fields to Ida's swampy tea, lingers like a fog. You're desperate for sleep, and as the village sinks deeper into quiet, you're ready to let the world fade. It's time to reflect on this medieval grind, to let the worries of 1350 slip away, and to ease into a gentle drift toward slumber. The air's cool, the hearth's embers barely glow, and you're about to find a moment of calm in this relentless life. You shift on the straw, trying to find a spot that doesn't jab your ribs. The day's been a marathon, waking to rooster crows, hauling water, slogging through fields, dodging market scams, and surviving the Lord's feast. You can still taste the ale from the village green, hear the minstrel's lute, and feel the sting of Geetha's glare in the weaving shed. Mainstream fact medieval life was a cycle of labor and survival, with peasants working from dawn to dusk, their days dictated by the seasons and the Lord's demands. You're feeling it now, every ache, every itch from that lice-ridden tunic, every worry about tomorrow's chores. But let's pause. Picture the village now, bathed in moonlight, its thatched roof silvered and still. The reeve's not barking orders. The market stalls are empty, and even the church bell's silent. Here's a quirky tidbit some peasants believed dreaming of bread meant good luck. A sign of plenty in a world where hunger was a constant shadow. You smile faintly, hoping your dreams bring a loaf or two, not more of Ada's moldy cures. Historians still argue whether these beliefs gave comfort or just masked despair. But right now, you're clinging to the idea of a soft, warm dream to carry you away. Your family's snores are a steady rhythm, like a lullaby you didn't ask for. The hut smells smoke, damp straw, a hint of that salve blend into something familiar, almost soothing. You're too tired to fear the night hags or curses anymore. Let them haunt someone else. Here's a joke. Softer now, why did the peasant dream of fields? Because even sleep couldn't escape the plow. You let out a quiet chuckle, feeling your shoulders loosen. The day's weight is lifting, bit by bit. As you sink deeper into the straw, its rustle fading to a whisper. Now, let's slow things down. Let the world grow gentle. Picture yourself sinking deeper into that straw bed, its roughness softening as your body relaxes. Muscle by muscle, the hut's walls, once drafty, seem to cradle you now. Their creaks blending into a distant hum, like a stream flowing far away. The village is asleep, its chaos tucked away under a blanket of stars. You're not a peasant tonight, not a worker dodging the reeve or fumbling with looms. You're just you, floating in a quiet sea, where the day's worries mud, markets, trials dissolve into mist. Feel your breath slow, each inhale pulling in the cool night air, each exhale letting go of the Lord's rules, the market's noise, the weight of survival. The hearth's last ember glows faintly, a tiny beacon in the dark, whispering that tomorrow can wait. Your eyelids grow heavy, like soft curtains falling, and the straw beneath you feels less like a burden, more like a nest. Let the village fade its bells, its gossip, its endless tasks until all that's left is this moment. This stillness. You're drifting now, carried by a gentle current, toward a place where fields don't need plowing and pottage tastes like plenty. The stars outside are watching, their light soft, eternal, guiding you to rest. Let the day slip away. Let the night hold you close. Sleep is near, wrapping you in its quiet embrace. Rest now, deeply, and let the world turn softly without you.